e4, c5, f4, d5.
The most critical, in reply to play on the flank black counters in the center. But here two things are not easy for him.
E takes d5.
The only way to play for an advantage. Now black can choose between two plans, the immediate regaining of the pawn by 3. Mentary pukul d5, or playing for a lead in development with 3. Kuda f6.
Knight f6. Bishop b5. Check.
Before playing to hold the extra pawn, it is useful to exchange the light square bishops.
Bishop d7. Bishop takes d7. Check. Queen takes d7. c4. e6. Queen e2.
After.
Bishop e7. D takes e6. Queen takes e6. Queen takes e6. F takes e6.
Sveshnikov Rechel, Anapa 1991, black encountered serious difficulties.
Knight f3. Knight c6. Short castle. Knight b4. Knight c3. Knight d7. a3. Knight c6. d3. Short castle. Bishop e3. Bishop f6. Knight e4. Bishop d6. f5. Short castle. F takes e6. F takes e6. D takes e6.
Is risky on account of
Queen e7. Knight f3. Knight c6. Short castle. Rook a e8.
with fine play for the sacrificed material, Moyano Verit, Palma 1991.
d3. Short castle. D takes e6. F takes e6. Knight f3. Knight c6. Short castle.
An important position for the evaluation of the variation, where black is still a pawn down. After.
Knight g4. Knight g5. e5. f5. Knight h6. g4. Rook takes f5. Rook takes f5. Queen takes f5. h3. Knight f6. Knight c3. Knight d4. Queen d1. Rook f8. Bishop e3.
With the better chances for white.
e5. f5. Knight d4.
And white retained his extra pawn by
Knight takes d4. E takes d4. Bishop g5. Rook a e8. Queen f3. Queen c7. g3. Knight d7. Knight d2. Knight e5. Queen d5. Check.
or
King h8. Knight e4. Knight f7. Bishop f4,
Kampora Sharov, Buenos Aires 1994.
rook a e8,
Black brings up his heavy artillery, in order to open the position by e6 e5. After other moves too, he does not have an easy life.
knight c3, e5, f5,
In short, Kasparov Paris Rapid 1990, the world champion chose.
queen takes f5, bishop g5, knight d4, knight takes d4, queen takes g5, knight f5, bishop c7, knight e4, knight takes e4, queen takes e4, g6, knight e3, b6, knight d5, e4, d takes e4, knight takes e4, rook a e1,
Alternatives.
knight takes g5, queen takes e8,
Or
knight takes c3, queen takes e8, rook takes e8, rook takes e8, check, king f7, rook e1, king g8, knight e5, queen takes g5, knight f7,
also fail to equalize.
knight f6, queen d1,
When white stood better, as will be seen, the entire variation abounds in tactical nuances, demanding of the player's accuracy and resourcefulness. When white stood better, as will be seen, the entire variation abounds in tactical nuances, demanding of the player's accuracy and resourcefulness.
knight d4, queen e1,
Of course,
queen takes f5,
is weaker on account of
knight takes d4, knight takes f5, bishop g5,
and in case of
h6, bishop takes f6, rook takes f6, queen e2, knight d4, queen e4,
certain advantage for white.
knight g4,
This position was reached in the game Bangui Vlau, Bins 1994. By continuing here,
knight d5, h6, bishop d2, knight f6, knight takes f6, check, rook takes f6, queen e2, knight d4, queen e4,
white would have gained a promising position. The weakness of the light squares in black's position together with his bad dark square bishop oblige him to defend passively.
knight b d7, c4, a6,
Leads to complicated play after. White can play
bishop takes d7, check, queen takes d7, bishop takes d7.
The game Stayishkina Bystriakova, St. Petersburg 2003 continued.
Queen e2, bishop g4, knight f3, queen d6, d3, e6, knight c3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, e takes d5, short castle.
With an enduring advantage.
Knight f3, e6, d takes e6, bishop takes e6, d3, bishop e7, short castle, short castle, knight c3, bishop f5, knight e5, bishop d6, king h1, queen c7, queen f3, rook f e8.
With excellent play for the sacrificed material, Moyano Verit, Palma 1991.
Bishop a4,
Leads to complicated play, e.g.
b5, c takes b5, knight takes d5, knight f3, g6, knight c3, knight 5 b6, d4, knight takes a4, queen takes a4, bishop g7.
Hodgson Uriola, Tallinn 1987.
Queen takes d5, knight c3.
Attempting to win a tempo by not moving the queen back also leaves white higher chances, for instance.
Queen f5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, bishop d7, short castle, e6, d3, long castle, knight e5, knight takes e5, f takes e5, queen takes e5, rook takes f7, knight f6, bishop takes d7, check, rook takes d7, rook takes d7, king takes d7, queen e2.
And black has a chronic weakness at e6. Smolin Razmislav, USSR 1991. Or
Queen d6, knight f3, queen takes f4,
is bad on account of
d4, queen c7, bishop b5, check. Knight f6, d4,
better is
c takes d4, knight b5, queen d8, queen takes d4, bishop d7.
although here 2-9, Menteri e5, gives white a significant advantage.
e6, bishop e3, knight g4, queen e2, knight takes e3, queen takes e3, c takes d4, knight takes d4, Queen b6. Long castle. Bishop e7. Bishop b5. Check.
Sveshnikov Sachs, Ljubljana 1994. White has a lead in development, which enables him to consolidate his opening advantage.
Queen d8.
Attempts to gain time by not returning the queen to its original square also leave white with the better chances.
Knight f3. a6. d4. c takes d4. Queen takes d4. Queen takes d4. Knight takes d4. e6. g3. Bishop d7. Bishop g2.
Karajika Sachs, Vinkovci 1976.
Knight c6. Bishop b5. Bishop d7. Short castle.
Is quite popular. Or
Knight f6. Knight e5. Knight d4. Bishop c4. e6. f5. Rook c8. Queen e2. e6. Bishop takes c6. Bishop takes c6. f5. Bishop e7. F takes e6. Queen d4. Check. King h1. Bishop d6. Knight takes c6. B takes c6. d3. Short castle. F takes e6. Rook c e8. Bishop g5.
Sveshnikov Voris, Podol's 1992.
e6. b3. Bishop e7. Bishop b2. Knight f6. d3. Short castle. Knight e4. Knight d4. Bishop takes d7. Queen takes d7. c4. Rook a d8. Knight takes d4. C takes d4. Knight takes f6. Check. Bishop takes f6. b4.
Sveshnikov Kiselev, Podol's 1992, with the better game for white in both cases.
Knight f6. Bishop b5. Check. Bishop d7. Bishop takes d7. Check. Knight b takes d7. Queen e2. g6. b3. Bishop g7. Bishop b2. Knight d5.
Leads to complicated play. With the text move, white immediately occupies this important outpost at e5, hindering the development of black's queenside.
Knight e5. e6. Queen f3.
After
Knight b d7. Knight takes d7. Knight takes d7. b3. Bishop e7, bishop b2, bishop f6, long castle, queen a5, g4, rook b8, g5, bishop d4, knight b5.
Black began to experience serious difficulties. Kurdish Suba, Romania 1983. While if
a6, b3, knight f d7, knight takes d7, knight takes d7, bishop b2,
he also has difficult problems to solve.
bishop e7,
Black's main problem is the rapid completion of his development, which White does everything to try and hinder.
b3,
Things are not changed by
knight b d7, bishop b2, knight takes e5, f takes e5, knight d5, knight e4, a6, long castle, rook b8, g4, b5, bishop g2, bishop b7, queen e2, knight takes e5, bishop takes b7, rook takes b7, f takes e5, knight d5, knight e4, c4, rook h f1.
with slightly the better game for White. Sveshnikov Asiv, St. Petersburg 1993. While
short castle, bishop b2, knight b d7,
simply transposes
knight f d7, bishop b2, short castle, long castle, f5.
the critical position of the variation. White has deployed his pieces well, creating the preconditions for play both on the kingside and in the center. In Sveshnikov-Kovalevskaya, Oviedo 1992, with several precise moves White gained an enduring advantage.
Knight takes d7, bishop takes d7, d4, c takes d4, knight b5, bishop c6, queen e2, bishop e4, knight takes d4, queen b6, queen b5.
Black's weakness at e6, combined with the opponent's control of the d-file, make his position difficult.